Welcome to today's episode of the Deep Dive Credit Podcast, presented by Elite Credit Solutions. We are your trusted partner in affordable credit repair, proudly based in Tampa, Florida, and dedicated to serving clients across the entire United States. Join us as we explore the intricacies of credit management, share expert insights, and empower you with the knowledge you need to achieve your financial goals. Get ready for an enlightening journey into the world of credit. Let's dive in.
Okay, so we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
That new car smell. You're driving off the lot feeling like you're on top of the world.
We have freedom.
Exactly. But then
Life happens.
life happens.
Okay.
Exactly. And suddenly that car lease feels less like a dream and more like, well,
A bit of a nightmare.
yeah, like a financial anchor weighing you down. And you're probably thinking, how do I get out of this thing?
Especially when those monthly payments are staring you in the face.
Right. And you've probably seen a ton of articles online, just like we have, promising to reveal the secrets of breaking a car lease.
We've got LegalZoom, Experian, Lending Tree.
Even some insights from Progressive.
Yeah, a lot of information to sift through.
A lot. And who has time to read all that, especially when you're already stressed about the lease itself? So that's where we come in. We're diving deep into all those sources to help you
Unpack those options.
figure out what they really cost you.
And ultimately, find the best way to escape that lease without totally wrecking your finances.
Because let's be honest, the first question on everyone's mind is, can you really get out of a car lease?
Good question. And the short answer, according to all our sources, yes, you can.
Okay, that's reassuring. There's always a but.
There's a big but. It's rarely easy, and it's almost never cheap.
LegalZoom really stresses this point. They say your lease contract is like the holy grail.
The ultimate authority.
Exactly. Don't assume that all leases are the same.
Yeah.
You can't just compare, say, a General Motors lease to a Daimler Chrysler lease and expect the penalties to be identical.
Nope. Every contract is different.
So before you do anything else,
Grab that lease agreement
dust it off. Maybe grab a highlighter.
and start combing through it. Look for those early termination clauses, the fees, all the fine print that might make your eyes glaze over.
Because it's all spelled out there in black and white.
No assumptions. You got to know the rules of your specific lease.
Okay, so you've done your homework. You know what you're dealing with. Now let's talk about those escape routes. We've got 5 main options, and we'll go from the most drastic to the least painful, at least financially speaking.
Starting with option 1,
Brace yourself.
just returning the car.
I could already hear the groans.
Right. It sounds tempting, just like, I'm done, take it back.
I don't care what it costs.
Well, you should care, because LegalZoom actually calls this the most expensive way out.
Ouch.
Yeah, you're basically saying, I give up. And you're on the hook for all the remaining payments, plus any early termination penalties your contract has.
And that can add up really quickly.
Oh, yeah. Plus, Experian, Lending Tree, Progressive, they all agree that doing this can seriously hurt your credit score, especially if you don't pay the remaining balance.
So, not a great look for future loans or anything else that requires good credit.
Not ideal unless you're truly desperate and have no other options.
Okay, so maybe not the first choice. What about option 2? Voluntary repossession.
This one's interesting because LegalZoom is the only source that really dives into it.
What's the gist?
It's basically where you ask the leasing company to take the car back early.
So instead of them coming to repossess it, you're initiating the surrender.
Exactly. And while there might not be any upfront costs like option 1, this is still repossession, plain and simple. It's going to ding your credit because you're admitting you can't fulfill the terms of the lease.
Got it. So on to option 3, rolling the payments into a new lease.
Ah, yes. The classic trade-in maneuver.
So you're basically trading in your current leased car for a brand new one.
Yep, and technically this lets you escape the old lease without those massive early termination penalties.
Sounds like a win-win.
There.
There's always a but.
There's a big but.
Yeah.
You need to consider the full picture.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Both Experian and Progressive are warning that you're essentially paying for 2 cars now.
Double the payment.
Exactly. Your monthly payments could skyrocket.
That's a serious consideration.
This option could work if you absolutely need a different vehicle, but before you jump in, you have to do the math. Can you really handle those double payments?
Don't let desperation drive you into a worse financial situation.
Good advice. All right, on to option 4, buying out the lease and then selling the car.
Now things are getting interesting.
Right. Experian, Lending Tree, and Progressive all see this as a potential way to, at the very least, minimize your losses.
And maybe even
maybe even turn a profit, according to LendingTree and Progressive.
So how does this work?
You're basically buying the car from the leasing company at the residual value.
Residual value.
That's the price you agreed upon at the very beginning of your lease. It's like fulfilling that final condition of the contract.
Okay, so you might have to pay any remaining lease payments, maybe some fees, but then the car's all yours.
Exactly. And then you can sell it yourself, trade it in, whatever you want.
Sounds good, but LendingTree makes a crucial point. They say that residual value is often higher than the car's actual market value.
That's important to remember. You can't go in thinking you'll make a killing.
No guaranteed windfall.
Nope. So on to what might seem like the holy grail of lease-breaking options. Number 5, the lease transfer.
This is the one everyone hopes for, right?
It does sound pretty ideal, especially if you can make it work. Progressive even calls it the most cost-effective option if it's available.
So what's the catch?
Well, you're finding someone else to take over your lease, but of course, you need the leasing company's approval.
So it's not just a matter of handing over the keys to your neighbor.
Nope, there's a process. You'll likely have some transfer fees, but it's usually way cheaper than those early termination penalties we talked about.
Okay, but what happens if the new person can't make the payments? Are you still on the hook?
That's a good question, and both Experian and Progressive warn that some contracts can still hold you liable if the new lessee defaults.
So this isn't just about finding anyone off the street.
Exactly. LendingTree really emphasizes finding someone you trust, like a family member or a close friend, someone who won't leave you hanging if things go wrong.
And, of course, get everything in writing.
Always. You need to clearly outline who's responsible for what, just in case the unexpected happens.
Okay, so we've got our 5 main escape routes. Returning the car, voluntary repossession, rolling those payments into a new lease, buying out the lease and selling the car, and the ever-so-elusive lease transfer.
5 options, each with its own pros and cons.
But before we dive into which one might be right for you, LendingTree brings up a couple of special situations. What if you're in the military, or what about lemon laws?
Good point. Let's talk about those.
First up, active-duty military personnel. You guys have a unique advantage thanks to the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or SDRA.
LendingTree explains that this might allow you to break a lease without penalties under certain conditions.
So if you get called to serve, have a permanent change of station, or are facing a lengthy deployment, that lease might not be as binding as it seems.
Right, and it extends to dependents of service members, too.
Good to know. The other interesting point LendingTree raises is about lemon laws.
We all know those protect you if you buy a faulty car. But do they apply to leases?
It turns out, in most states, they do, except in Nevada and New Mexico, where things get a little tricky.
So if you're having constant, serious problems with your leased car, it's worth checking if your state's lemon laws offer any protection.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to these tricky situations.
Absolutely. But now the question is, how do you choose the best way out of your specific lease?
That's what we're here to help you with. So stay with us. We're going to break it all down after this quick break. Okay, so we've talked about all those escape routes, but I bet you're thinking, okay, great, but how do I actually apply this to my situation?
Right. It's one thing to know the options. It's another to actually choose the right one.
It's like having a toolbox full of tools, but not knowing which one to use.
Exactly. And that's where, you guessed it, that lease agreement comes in.
Again, that thing really is the key, isn't it?
It is. It's like your roadmap out of this lease land.
It's got all the specifics, the early termination fees, whether or not lease transfers are even allowed, all those potential penalties.
Yep. It's all there, but you got to know where to look.
It's like those software terms and conditions we just click agree and hope for the best.
Ah, guilty as charged.
But with a lease, ignoring those details can really cost you.
Big time. So before you even start comparing those escape routes, pull out that agreement, get comfortable with the rules of your specific lease.
Okay, lease agreement deciphered. What's next?
Now it's time to look inward at your finances.
The dreaded budget talk.
I know. But it's important. How much can you realistically afford to spend to get out of this lease?
And are there any other expenses on the horizon that I need to think about?
Exactly. Holiday shopping, maybe?
Oh, yeah, that's coming up fast. Or what about unexpected home repairs?
Right. Life doesn't just stop because you're dealing with a car lease.
Nope. A potential move, medical bills, anything that might strain your budget, you got to consider it all.
Because remember, some of those escape routes have upfront costs.
You don't want to jump out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Exactly. So no impulsive decisions here. We're thinking strategically.
Got it. So once I have a clear picture of my finances, then what?
Then you can start comparing the real costs of each option. Let's say minimizing the hit to your bank account is your top priority.
Makes sense.
If your lease allows it, and you can find a reliable person to take over, a lease transfer might be the way to go.
But what if transferring isn't an option? Either my lease doesn't allow it, or I don't know anyone who can take it over.
Okay, then buying out the lease and selling the car could be a good alternative, especially if you think you can sell it for a decent price.
But you do need the cash up front to actually buy it from the leasing company, right?
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee you'll make your money back.
You're right, there's risk involved. But what if someone just wants OUT and fast, even if it costs a bit more? If those monthly payments are just not doable anymore and other options are off the table, then returning the car and ending the lease might be the only path forward.
The rip off the Band-Aid approach.
It is, and it'll probably be the most expensive way to go. Plus, it could hurt your credit score, but sometimes it's the necessary evil to avoid a bigger financial disaster down the line.
It's all about weighing those short-term consequences against the long-term impact.
Exactly. And hey, don't forget about those special situations we talked about earlier, active duty military. Look into the SCRA. Think your car might be a lemon. Check those state laws.
You might have more leverage than you realize.
Right. Okay, so we've analyzed the lease, assessed our finances, we're comparing costs. What else do we need to think about before making that final decision?
What's the next step?
Now it's time to put on your negotiator hat and contact the leasing company.
Oh boy, here we go.
I know, it can be intimidating. But remember, explain your situation clearly and calmly. You're not trying to pick a fight, you're aiming for a collaborative solution.
No tearful breakdowns, no yelling matches, just professional and persuasive.
Exactly. You'd be surprised how often leasing companies are willing to work with you, especially if you've been a good customer with a solid payment history.
So even if that lease agreement looks scary, it's always worth having a conversation.
Absolutely. And one more thing, get everything in writing.
Good point.
Any agreements, payment plans, revised terms, make sure it's all documented.
To avoid any confusion or disputes later on.
Exactly. Analyze the lease, assess your finances, compare costs, negotiate with the company, document everything.
I'm sensing a theme here.
What's that?
Knowledge is power. The more you understand your options and the rules of the game, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this whole process.
That lease agreement really is your roadmap.
So study it well.
Okay.
All right, let's fast forward a bit. You've successfully escaped that car lease. You're free. What lessons should we take away from this experience?
Besides, always read the fine print.
Yes. Beyond that, there are some bigger picture takeaways here. Okay, I'm ready for some wisdom. What have we learned about ourselves and the world of car leasing?
Well, for starters, leasing a car is a serious financial commitment. It's not just like renting a car for a few years.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than that.
Exactly. Before you even think about signing a lease, think about your current needs, your future plans, your overall financial situation. It all plays a role.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of that new car smell. Forget to think long term.
And speaking of long term, let's talk about credit scores. Breaking a lease, especially if you miss payments or default, can really damage your credit.
And that low score can follow you around like a shadow.
It can affect your ability to get loans, rent an apartment, even get certain jobs. It's a ripple effect.
So if you're facing a lease situation that could impact your credit, what's the best course of action?
Contact the leasing company ASAP. Explore all your options. Don't wait until it's too late.
No burying your head in the sand. Communication is key.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the immediate need to escape a lease. But let's zoom out even further. What does the future of car ownership look like?
Ooh, now we're getting philosophical.
Right. We've seen how restrictive those traditional leases can be, especially when life throws curveballs.
They lock you into a commitment that might not work a year or two down the line.
Exactly. But what if there was a more flexible option? What if car ownership became more like subscribing to a service?
Hold on. You've got my attention. Tell me more.
Imagine instead of being tied to a 3 or 4 year lease, you could subscribe to a car for a shorter period, maybe even month to month.
So if my needs change, I could just switch to a different vehicle, no more feeling trapped.
Exactly. You could upgrade, downgrade, even pause your subscription if needed, all without the penalties and hassle of breaking a traditional lease.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. Is this a real possibility, or are we in sci-fi territory here?
It's more real than you think. Some car manufacturers are already experimenting with subscription models. People are craving flexibility, and the industry is starting to listen.
So it's not just a pipe dream. This could be how we own cars in the future.
It's an exciting possibility, but I'm sure there are challenges to work out, too.
Like what?
Well, how do you structure the pricing? Is it a flat monthly fee or based on usage, the type of vehicle, mileage? There's a lot to figure out.
And what about insurance? Would it be bundled into the subscription, or would I need a separate policy for each car I subscribe to?
Right, that could get complicated quickly. And then there's the question of availability. If everyone suddenly wants to subscribe to the latest electric SUV, will there be enough cars to go around?
Good point. There could be waiting lists, limited choices depending on demand. And what about people who like the idea of owning their car outright? Is there still a place for traditional financing in this subscription-based future?
That's a great question. Subscription models might not appeal to everyone, especially those who value the stability and potential resale value of owning a car. It's all about having choices that fit different needs and preferences.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. We went from feeling trapped in a lease to imagining a future where car ownership is as flexible as our lives.
And it all comes back to being informed and empowered. Whether you're navigating a current lease or considering those new ownership models, knowledge is your best tool.
So, to our listener, thank you for diving deep with us today. We hope this episode has given you a better understanding of your lease-breaking options and a glimpse into those exciting possibilities that lie ahead.
Remember, if you're struggling with a lease right now, don't hesitate to reach out to the leasing company and explore those escape routes we discuss.
And if you're intrigued by those subscription-based models, do some research, see if they might be a good fit for you down the road.
Until next time, keep diving deep and stay informed.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today, escaping those leases that are causing you stress. But then, we even touched on the future of car ownership.
It is a lot to take in, but before we wrap things up, I think it's worth circling back to that idea of subscription-based ownership.
Yeah, I'm still kind of stuck on that.
Yeah.
It almost sounds too good to be true. Like, what's the catch? Swap cars whenever I want, pause my subscription if I'm traveling?
Yeah.
Is this really the magic bullet for all of our lease-breaking headaches?
Well, it definitely addresses a lot of those frustrations we talked about earlier. Just imagine, instead of being stuck with that sedan for 3 years, you could easily switch to an SUV for a family road trip, then back to a fuel-efficient compact for your commute.
Or even test out an electric vehicle for a few months, see if it really fits my lifestyle, all without committing to a long-term lease or purchase.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. And think about this. What if you're moving to a new city? You could just pause your subscription, then pick it back up when you're settled. It offers so much flexibility that traditional leases just can't compete with.
But like with any new system, I'm sure there are going to be some challenges.
Oh, absolutely. For one thing, how would pricing even work? Would it be a flat monthly fee or based on usage, the type of vehicle, mileage? There's a lot to consider.
And what about insurance? Would that be bundled into the subscription, or would I need to get my own policy for every car I subscribe to? That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It could get messy, that's for sure. And then there's the question of availability. Let's be real. If everyone suddenly wants to subscribe to the latest and greatest electric SUV, are there going to be enough cars to go around?
Yeah, you're right. There could be those waiting lists, limited choices, depending on the demand. And what about people who actually like the idea of owning their car? Having that sense of ownership. Is there still a place for traditional financing in this subscription-based future?
That's a valid point. Subscription models aren't going to be for everyone, especially for those who value stability and the potential to resell their car down the line. It's about having choices that really cater to different needs and preferences.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from feeling trapped in our leases to envisioning a future where owning a car is as flexible as our lives are. Who knew?
And it all boils down to being informed and empowered. Whether you're trying to get out of a lease right now or you're thinking about different ways to own a car in the future, knowledge is key.
So to all of our listeners out there, thank you for diving deep with us today. We hope this episode has given you a clearer understanding of how to break free from a car lease and maybe even spark some excitement about what the future holds for car ownership.
And remember, if you're struggling with a lease right now, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to the leasing company. Remember those escape routes we talked about.
And if you're curious about those subscription models, do a little research, see if they might be a good fit for you down the line.
That's right. Until next time, keep diving deep, stay informed, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Bye, everyone.
That wraps up another insightful episode of the Deep Dive Credit Podcast, brought to you by Elite Credit Solutions. your go-to resource for affordable credit repair across the United States. We appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you found the information valuable and empowering. If you're ready to take control of your financial future, don't hesitate to reach out to us at 813-317-6776. Additionally, don't forget to like today's podcast, follow us, or subscribe to stay in tune with future updates. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep striving for excellence in your credit journey.